What a wonderful way to really talk about how important academic advising is across the globe during this week. But to partner on this presentation and panel with two of our NACADA's partner associations and two of my very close friends. So we're going to spend some time talking about how important global partnerships are. So I'm Charlie Nutt. I'm the Executive Director of NACADA. Oscar?
Hello, my name is Oscar van der Wijngaard. I'm outgoing chair now of the board of directors of LVSA, the Dutch Association for Academic Advising.
I'm David Gray. I'm the chief executive of UCAT, the UK Advising and Tutoring Association.
So one of the things we will talk about during this panel is, why do global partnerships matter? So David, why don't you start the conversation for us?
Yeah, I think our ancestors actually have a lot to say about why global partnerships are important, Charlie. So 2,500 years ago, Heraclitus told us that the only constant in life is change. And our Latin ancestors had a proverb that forewarned is forearmed. So today we're living in a society, an information age, in which the average human being is apparently exposed to more information in one day than a medieval human was exposed to in their entire lifetime. And the communication technologies we've got, the things like the internet, have enabled information and ideas to spread very, very rapidly. So even if you don't think that advising in Egypt or India or Burkina Faso or any country you care to name is relevant to your advising practice where you are, it is, because of those spread of ideas.
Very good. And then I think we all can say that while education seems to move very slowly at times as we're trying to get programs through the bureaucracy of a campus or dealing with all the issues we have to deal with, change is inevitable. And that is so true today, particularly with what we're dealing with across the globe. But I think it's really important to recognize that even without today's issues, that change simply is going to occur. And we can either stick our head in the sand, or we can become very proactive in how we think about that change. And as David said, we're looking at a global community of higher education. And if that's the case, then we need to be thinking about globally, how does academic advising need to adapt? How does it need to morph? How does it need to focus maybe in different ways than it has in the past? And then how can we learn from each other across the globe, ways that we can work with our own students on our own campuses? Oscar.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that's an important part of that, I think, is that it's not only about learning how others do things, that we also try to do as best as we can, but the exchange of ideas and sort of underlying perspectives on advising is also very important. So that sort of being confronted with other fundamental ideas about what student success may be, for instance, and how advising supports student success, that also forces us to be much more articulate about our own ideas of what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, which in times like these, sort of, as both of you sort of talked about, is so important, because that sort of allows us to stay not just sort of in the game, but maybe ahead of the game in terms of being able to say, we're not just following trends, and we're not just aware of what's going on, but we have our own position within this that has to do with our values. The values don't need to be the same for everyone, because we come from different perspectives, but the fact that we are sort of learning about these different perspectives makes it a lot easier to define these values for ourselves. So it's the value of being connected is in just being informed, being more flexible, but it also in being more firm in a way on who you are yourself and what you want to accomplish, and how you look at the relevance and the purpose of advising.
I think that's very true, Oscar. And just because change is inevitable doesn't mean that we can't influence it in some way. So if you look, politicians in my country, policymakers in my country are looking to see what's going on across the world. The same is true in your countries, and they will see ideas that they like and bring back. Some of those ideas will be really good and might really benefit our students, but some of the other ideas may not. They may be less appropriate to our context. And in those kind of scenarios, we have a role as advisors to actually challenge and influence those changes in a way that is in the best interest of our students.
I also think, as we talked about the other day, Oscar, and we were planning for this panel, is that all of us are really focused on student success and how academic advising, personal tutoring supports student success. But I think we have to recognize that what student success looks like in the US, in UCAT, in the Netherlands, in China, in the UAE, those might be different in terms of our cultures, but advising still has to adapt to those. And we can learn from each other as we think about these global partnerships. I'm going to talk a little bit about NACADA. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this past year. This whole year is our celebration year. We were chartered on May the 2nd, 1979. Our membership is very wide encompassing. Primary role advisors, faculty advisors, administrators, both academic advising and institutional wide, career advisors, graduate students. I think part of that is very important to think about because advising is not structured the very same in every country or even in institutions within every country across the world. So because of the variety of structures, because of the variety of models, I think the constituencies of all three of our associations are very unique. And they really do reflect advising or personal tutoring as we think about that in higher education. The mission of NACADA is to promote student success by advancing the field of academic advising globally. And as Oscar knows, being on the board of directors for NACADA, the NACADA board of directors has just spent some time beginning a conversation about what are our values, what are our foundation points, what do we believe about the association, and move into the next decade or more. And one of the things that we've talked about is how do we really meet this mission of providing opportunities for professional development, networking, and leadership in our diverse membership. And one of the pieces I really liked that came out of the board's conversation last week is the fact that we're really talking about that our members or advisors across the globe look, I think, to all three of our associations and other associations, maybe in their countries, from the idea of what is the content that we need? How do we need to be engaged with our students as well as engaged with each others? And then what are those connections that we need to make? So as we think about this global partnership, what are those pieces that really tie back to that content, engagement, and connections as we go through? Our strategic goals are really important to the association. Scholarship is very important. All three of our associations are really focused on the idea of scholarship in the field, and we'll probably talk about those. Professional development opportunities. You know, I don't think I could talk about that one without saying that, of course, we're all looking at what do those new opportunities need to look like. You know, in this day of just in the past 3 months of face-to-face meetings not being the norm any longer right now, what does that mean that we might need to be doing virtually in ways that are different, but in ways that are expansive and begin to connect with what our face-to-face may look like in the future? I love this quote because I think it really talks about what we're doing in the partnerships across the globe. But that is, you know, we can begin by simply joining in and coming together and meeting. But we need to stay together. This partnership, this global connection has to be something that has staying power, has to be something that has real, a foundation and a belief of what we believe student success is. And then we've got to work together in order to be successful. So Oscar.
Yes. So a few words about sort of the association here in the Netherlands, LVSA, which stands for Landelijke Vereniging Studieadviseurs. Studieadviseurs literally meaning study advisors, not academic advisors. I think that's an interesting difference. That says something about the different histories of our associations and the educational systems we're in, by the way. But as you can see, we started in 1984, so we had our anniversary a year ago, our 35th in our 35th in our case. And what you see on this slide is a real quick overview of who we are and where we are right now. I realized when I wrote down this mission statement on this slide that this is right away, this is an example of the impact of international or global connections and collaboration. It's not that before LVSA and NACADA got connected more, LVSA did not have a purpose, but I think it was just described in a very dry language in the bylaws that are required for an association like ours, and that was it. Thinking about sort of making explicit, and as I was saying earlier, articulating really, so what are we about? Sort of, why are we doing what we're doing, and capturing that in a mission, I think is something we started to do a lot more after we'd been sort of in touch with NACADA, and saw how that association is constantly actually trying to articulate very clearly and think out loud about what it is that advising could be about and should be about. So the mission itself is not very surprising. It's referring to the two things that NACADA is also about: the desire to aid academic advisors in their professional development, and the recognition that the role of advising is critical when it comes to promoting student success. So we do things, we have been doing things slightly differently than NACADA until now, I would say. The emphasis of our activities really was on a fairly extensive program of courses that we were offering. One-day courses or courses that took 3 days with weeks in between, focusing on many topics that are quite common in the field. You see a few examples: stress management, study skills, change management, conversation skills, all these things. But really select a curriculum of courses. And we were offering this curriculum to a growing membership. Obviously, the Netherlands is a small country. We have 14 universities, and currently slightly over 550 members, by which we think we cover about 85% of the study advisors active in the Netherlands. And we have a board that consists of representatives of each from these universities. And the annual conference that you see listed there is something that we have also been doing for quite some time, but it is also an example of how, again, we are following sort of, I would say in this case, clearly the example and the inspiration given to us by NACADA, which puts such a strong emphasis on sort of member involvement. So the plans for this year, 2020, were that this conference would be the first that would be based on proposals submitted by members and presentations given by members, rather than the board inviting speakers who would give workshops and presentations. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we had to cancel or at least postpone that conference. So it's quite likely that we'll be doing this now in a year from now. But so that's who we are. And these are interesting times for LVSA. Because here in the Netherlands as well, we feel that there is a growing interest also outside the field of advising for what advising could be. And maybe that could take us to the next slide. Quite a few things sort of have changed when you look at the current situation and maybe like a decade ago. Sort of a little bit of historical background, not going too much into it now, but until shortly after World War II, going to university was a fairly elitist affair in the Netherlands. Like you can see around 1960, 3% of Dutch citizens had a university degree. And in the course of the 60s and the 70s, sort of university became something that was much more accessible, and that our governments also wanted to be much more accessible to a larger piece of the population. So in 2018, 18% of Dutch citizens, and this is everyone, had a university degree. So the emphasis in sort of government policy and government funding on universities was very much on growth. And a growing university was also seen often as a successful university. Not saying that sort of the academic content and mission of a university was not important, but for one thing, a lot of the funding was really attached to this idea of accessibility and growth. That makes universities make certain decisions about sort of letting students in, and maybe putting the emphasis very much also on that accessibility in terms of students entering university. in the last 20 years, I think there's a growing sort of awareness that things are changing. One thing that we can't do much about is a demographic decline. There's just fewer and fewer young people, as there are in many countries sort of in this part of Europe, and I think it's maybe fairly similar in the United States.
Yes.
This means that if a system of funding is also based on the quantity of enrollment, you cannot simply keep sort of staying sort of on top of things by letting in more students when there's simply fewer young people to enter university. This is one of the things that I believe sort of causes a shift now in an attention not only towards enrollment, but also to retention. And I know we have to be very careful in saying that retention is what we're doing in advising, but I don't think there's anything wrong about saying that if we sort of increase or enhance the student experience and look at the student experience much more from a student perspective and support students in that, that is quite likely to also enhance retention. So even though the reasons may be different, we may be in it because we have an idea about student success and the role that we can play really primarily from the perspective of the student, there is clearly a retention aspect in this as well. And that is gaining value in the Netherlands. So that's a good thing. Until 2015, going to university in the Netherlands was very inexpensive. Students received a grant from the government that was changed in 2015 into a loan system, which put a different perspective for students on what it meant to be a student, because now you were paying and you could leave university with a huge debt. So even if nothing else would have changed, sort of the need to successfully navigate through a program within sort of a relatively short amount of time increased, which is another reason for sort of a growing attention for all those who support that student experience and make it more, if you will, I don't like the term, but more efficient. Again, efficiency is not necessarily what we're about in advising, but taking charge of your studies, becoming more of a successful student is something that we definitely want to promote and support in students. So there is a role for advising there. So all these elements sort of that are changing, less time basically, because it becomes more expensive, more value sort of for the notion of retention on the part of universities. And I think also more of a demand of quality, or sort of on the part of students, sort of it's become much more important that universities nowadays explain what the quality of their education is about, and also what the quality of the study experience at that institution is about. And this is another reason, I think, why there is a lot more attention for academic advising. So these are great times. It is also an interesting challenge because with LVSR, we really have to think actively about how we respond to this. And indeed, sort of the exchange with other associations like NACADA and UCAD helps us a lot there. Sort of, Charlie already mentioned scholarship. Scholarship, I think, was not that important in the history of LVSR so far. Sort of knowing what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, what the outcome of it is, even those practical aspects of scholarship, research, assessment, evaluation, we're paying a lot more attention to that nowadays than we used to for a long time, I think. So in the next slide, there is a short sort of overview of how those global connections came about. It starts with sort of a personal experience, which is not to say that that triggered the entire sort of history that follows, but for me, the global connection started in 2005 when I joined NACADA. I started working 2 years before that at a university college in the Netherlands that used an advising system that needed sort of a different type of advising than we were used to. So I came to NACADA, and first connections were made. It led to a visit in 2011 by Charlie to our university where he talked about advising. From one thing came the other. You see it here. We hosted in 2013 sort of the first international or the first conference out of North America by NACADA. The year after, LVSA and NACADA started sort of on a research seminar together. LVSA promoted its members to go abroad by by giving them scholarships to attend the conferences in Dublin and Hasselt. And recently, sort of last year, members of the LVSA board attended the UCAT annual conference in Plymouth to discuss collaboration also between those two associations. And then 2020 was supposed to be the first year indeed of this member-driven conference. But I know we'll get there. And it was supposed to be the year in which David Gray, on behalf of UCAT, would do the opening keynote to the LVSA conference. Okay, quickly a few pictures. Charlie, indeed. This is Charlie. You can see that things haven't changed. As energetic as always in 2011 when you were talking to our colleagues in Maastricht. This, we were aware of this when we took this picture, is a historical picture because it has representatives from what would become UCAT. Penny Robinson is there. It has very active globalists, I would say, sort of Kathy Stockwell, Karen Sullivan-Vance, Jennifer Jocelyn is there, members of the Dutch LVSA board, German representatives. This is when we were all together in 2013 in Maastricht. And I think, yeah, was an important step forward in the global collaborations. Just a quick glimpse at how we had a few American visitors that you may recognize sort of the year after to conduct this research seminar with NACADA right at the time of the European Soccer Championship. And on a very fortunate evening there, we beat Spain, I think, 4 or 5-0. That was nice. Another example of this connection as it was growing here is a visit that some of us paid to the Beijing University of Technology in May 2018. And I selected that picture not only because it was really fascinating to be there, but also it has representatives of different countries and all 3 associations in it. Sort of to the far right, you see Dave Lochte, who is a very active member in UCAT as well. So here, another example of different countries and cultures coming together and exchanging ideas about sort of advising. And the last picture, and with that one I want to hand it over to David, is at the Louisville conference, no, the St. Louis conference this was, of NACADA, where former presidents, you see we're in a very sort of distinguished company here, and David and I had dinner to again talk about global connections. David, over to you.
Thanks, Oscar. Yes, well, I'll say a few words about UCAT, the UK Advising and Tutoring Association, and hopefully link back to some of the things that you've said there, Oscar. So UCAT was founded in 2015. We're a young association. We've only been going 5 years, but we were given a great deal of assistance by NACADA in our founding. And that's been, really gratefully received. It's part of our DNA, it's part of our history, and we have this ongoing partnership and collaboration with NACADA, which is really, really important to us. It's really important that we see ourselves as part of that NACADA global family, but it also helps us really achieve what we're trying to achieve. So just to give a bit of context, we're called UK Advising and Tutoring because in the UK we have a system called personal tutoring. That's what we call academic advising. So it's just our term for academic advising is normally personal tutoring, and that's a very much a sort of faculty advising process that we have in the UK. And our vision as an association really is to transform advising practices so that every student can flourish, so that they can experience inclusiveness, well-being and personal growth. So it's about a very developmental approach to advising that really helps students grow and succeed. And if we're going to help transform advising practices in that way, we know that collaboration that we have with global partners is absolutely vital to what we do, because together we're stronger and we can achieve more. So there have been some very good examples of things that we've done with NACADA that have really helped out. One that springs immediately to mind, one we're doing at the moment. I know NACADA are involved with the National Science Foundation and the Aspire project and creating the STEM guidance, the guidance for STEM advisors. We're actually taking that at the moment with UCAT and working with the National Science Foundation, the authors of that guidance from NACADA, to actually adapt that to the UK context to provide something that's a really useful resource to UK advisors. So that's a really good example of the way that these partnerships are working for us. So UCAT's sort of approach then really is these 4 things. Our primary goal is to try and increase the recognition of the value that advising brings to student success. And I think if you look back at the kind of things that Oscar said about the changes that happened to Dutch higher education, The same changes have happened here in the UK in the last sort of 20 years or so. Increasing numbers of students going to higher education, increasing cost of higher education, moving from grants to loan-based systems. All of those kind of changes that have happened in the Netherlands have also happened here, but we've now gone a stage further. And I don't know how this compares to the Netherlands, Oscar, maybe you can comment, but certainly here in the UK, the government have now introduced a regulatory body that has a regulatory function for higher education. So institutions are regulated and evaluated on their performance, and really the focus in the UK is around teaching excellence, but particularly around value for money for students. So to help achieve those objectives, we think it's important to provide professional development, as does NACADA and LVSR, and as Charlie has said, informed by scholarship, based on scholarship. So our goal is to help our members become more reflective practitioners who use that scholarship to inform their own professional development. We know also that there's a gap in advising research in the UK. So there is a literature base in the UK, but it's very small and has been for the last sort of 30 years or so. So if we're to demonstrate the value that advising has got, we need to build that research base and to provide the evidence that shows the impact of advising. So we've got to focus on building research capacity and helping people by supporting research that will help demonstrate that impact. And then the final piece of the puzzle for us is actually working with higher education institutions themselves to help them advance their advising practice across the board to give better student outcomes. So to give an example of the ways we do that, let's talk about some of the things that UCAT's doing at the moment. And this also speaks to the sort of partnership and collaboration that we have with NACADA. So one of the things we did, I think about 18 months ago now, we introduced the UCAT professional framework for advising and tutoring. And this we created by starting from the NACADA core competencies and adapting those and contextualizing those to the UK higher education context, adding additional, we call them components in there. But we're really using this as the basis of everything that UCAT does to identify what are the characteristics of good advising and tutoring. And we've underpinned that with our own set of core values. So in the same way that NACADA has core values of advising, we've defined our own core values of personal tutoring and academic advising. And then we've taken those two things to combine them into a professional recognition scheme. So this is about to launch later this month across the UK. It's been in pilot now for about 4 or 5 months. And the aim of this scheme is to actually allow advisors to come forward and have their existing practice recognised against that framework that we've devised. So it's kind of almost badge advisors as not quite meeting a certain standard, but showing that they evidence the competencies of that particular framework at different levels for different kinds of responsibilities that they might have. And we see this as being really important. We live in this culture now, particularly in higher education, a measurement culture where metrics are important, and we know that not everything that counts can be counted. But like it or not, we're driven by this culture. So this is a way that we can help institutions evidence the good work that they do by getting their staff recognised for the good practice that they have in supporting their students. So that's one of the things that we're moving forwards on at the moment. In terms of the sort of research piece, there are 2 things that we do there. So we have a special edition of the Frontiers in Education online journal, the Leadership in Higher Education section of that journal, which is currently being co-edited by editors from UCAT, NACADA and LVSR. So UCAT are leading on this initiative, but all 3 associations are involved. And it's the topic of this special edition is Academic Advising and Tutoring for Student Success in Higher Education, International Perspectives. And it's the international perspectives that's really important there. So this is very much a global partnership and a global collaboration. We've secured articles from a range of authors from across the globe. We have articles from LVSR members, from NACADA members, from UCAT members, from a range of different countries. And we're in the process of editing those articles at the moment, reviewing and editing those articles. It's an online publication, so they're released on a rolling basis. And the first of those articles has just gone into publication. The rest will be going online over the coming months, and then it's going to be made available as a collected ebook, which we'll make available across all 3 associations later in the year. And then to back up our aim to increase research capacity, we introduced a research mentoring program about 2 years ago, to help people who had an idea for something to do around, a research study around advising, but may not know how to go about conducting a research study, to take that idea from the very sort of germ of an idea all the way through designing and implementing a research study, and then publishing that in an appropriate venue once the study is completed. So that's been a really useful program for us. It's been really successful. As a result of that program so far, I think we've increased the publications in the UK and added 5 new journal publications around academic advising and personal tutoring. And that may not sound a lot, but given that there were only about 30 publications over the last 16 years, that's actually quite a significant increase in the volume of research that's out there in the UK. So we're going to continue that program. And we're looking at the moment as to how, particularly in the current climate, how we might make that more of a sort of virtual program, and how we might collaborate with other associations across the globe to help and support research for everybody. And then we have a range of other activities, the kind of things that you might be familiar with from NACADA. So we, like LVSR, we have an annual conference, we deliver monthly webinars, we've got online courses and discussion forums and all sorts of things. You can find out more at our website, so I'd encourage you to go take a look.
Before we leave this slide, I want to take a moment just to really focus on something I think is important for this panel and important to our conversation. And that is that NACADA has really worked very hard and very closely with our partner associations, as well as just advising professionals across the world, from the aspect of it's not NACADA's desire to go and tell anyone else how to advise or to set those standards that should be globally, but is to help and encourage everyone to develop their own strategies, their own processes. So as David pointed out, the professional framework for UCAT was built in many ways around the concept of the core competencies of NACADA. The core values for UCAT and personal tutoring were based in some way around the core values of NACADA. So it's not the idea that we want everyone to be uniformed or everyone to fit a certain model, but what we really are hoping through these global partnerships is we all can begin to think about and reflect upon advising from our own perspective, but not just in isolation, but working and looking at what each of us do in our particular units and areas. And I just thought that slide really pointed that out, David, from our work within that. So we want to end this little panel discussion with some conversations and go back to where we began with this slide of that everything's changing and that we must begin to really connect and bring pieces of where we need to be. So I'm going to stop the share so that you can see all 3 of us and we can have a conversation about where we are. So Oscar and David, I think we've talked a lot about the all the reasons why it's important for us to have these partnerships and the value of them. I want to kind of begin the conversation with what are some of the challenges that I think we might be facing as we go with this. And I want to bring up, first of all, just what we're going through right now with the virus, with the illness, with what's happening globally. I think it could be an easy reaction to that to be very isolationist, to think we're only going to think of ourselves, our own country, our own students, our own processes in this time of which everyone is frightened about what's happening globally. And I think through advising and through our associations particularly is a great way that we can begin to really hopefully keep that from occurring and recognizing that the challenge could be, but how do we continue to partner? As both of you said, you were having an annual conference, Oscar, for the first time, and David was going to keynote. NACADA's annual conference will be in Puerto Rico. You were both going to be there. We were going to be at UCAT in Scotland. And so it would be very easy to say, because we're not having these face-to-face meetings previously, we are still planning on Puerto Rico, within that it would be easy just to say, well, we're going to go our separate ways. And when things get back to normal, we'll come back together. Well, I think we all recognize we don't know what normal is going to be. And I think a challenge for us is how do we make sure that these partnerships are the normal, that this is the guidance that takes us forward. So I'm going to start with that being what I think I see as a challenge to us. David, what do you think is a challenge to how we need to continue this global peace?
I think you're right, Charlie. I think the challenge really is, what does this look like going forward? The kind of things that we've normally done, the kind of ways we've operated as associations may not be the same anymore. The things that have worked for us in the past may not be the things that work now. But I don't necessarily think we need to think of that as a challenge. Actually, I think there are an awful lot of opportunities here. And maybe this is a positive thing, a positive opportunity for change to something better. So we already alluded to the fact that we live in this information society. It's fantastic that you and Oscar and I, although we're spread at thousands of miles apart across the world, can have this conversation now, and that this will go out and be seen by people all around the world, all because of the technologies that we've got. And those technologies can really help us actually connect and work in different ways. I think we've got a good example of some of the ways we can use this as an opportunity at this point in time through something else that's happening in this Global Advising Week. So later in the week, there's a webinar that's going to be broadcast from UCAT's webinar series. And that webinar is from Karen Sullivan-Vance around advising in turbulent times. That was a presentation that Karen was due to give at the Region 8 conference in Canada, which I also went to, and unfortunately it was cancelled while we were there. So Karen didn't get to give that presentation, but I looked at the description of that and said, that's a really interesting presentation. People should see that. Why can't we make that available? We have the technologies through Zoom and things to make that available. Why can't we make that available to a wider audience? And we have done. So there are all sorts of opportunities in those ways. And there are also other kind of opportunities we have through things like online learning that we can share more widely between ourselves than we could with a sort of face-to-face session. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive and optimistic about how we can change for the better going forward.
And David, I think you've really taken it back to what advising does, is that students have challenges and we help them to find the opportunities in those to be successful. So if we really think about what we do with students every single day and think about how we encourage them to be successful and to figure out how to work around what challenges they may face, and we bring that to our own existence as advising globally, it's really just doing what I've always said, which is advisors should do with ourselves what we tell our students to do every single day. So
absolutely.
Together. Oscar, what about you? What do you think some challenges might be that we'll be facing that we need to think about?
Yeah, it's just, I don't want to ruin the party, but it's sort of before I go to another challenge. I agree with what you're both saying about the opportunities. And you also see sort of, I think we all see in the daily practice of our work that so much can still be done once you get used to Zoom, life size, sort of, well, all the options. Once you figure out how it works, you can get a lot done. But I think what is a challenge, but that's not just a challenge for the global collaboration in the context of advising, but at almost every level of society, how do we ensure this basic level of knowing each other and trusting each other that you need for all these online interactions to work smoothly? I think. I mean, the fact that sort of here I can work with colleagues online and actually feel that sometimes it might be even more efficient and effective than sort of offline, I think is also due to the fact that I know these people really well. So if we enter into a sort of an interesting conversation or discussion online with all its limitations, less visual cues, et cetera, it's fine because I know these people. I can read them a little bit. And the same goes for the three of us, for instance. The same goes definitely also for the interactions you have with your students. And with students in an advising role, you sometimes talk about fairly sensitive and delicate issues. And I think doing that with your advisees as you got to know them and as they got to know you in the offline situation is still quite acceptable. But now what if the conversation, the connection starts in this setting? That is a challenge, I think, because then, I mean, you're so aware of yourself. I mean, when we're talking, I think all of us do this online, we're looking at the others, but we're also looking at someone that we all otherwise never look at, which is ourselves, because we're in the frame too. So many things are different. So sort of we become very much aware of ourselves, which again can be easily overcome when you know each other, and then we can also talk about more delicate things. But I think that will be a challenge. I mean, all the opportunities are there, and I think that the need to learn from each other and to look sort of, to really think outside of that box and to know, okay, we're struggling with this, how are they doing this, has only sort of increased, and the willingness to listen to other ideas and perspectives. So in the short term, I see, actually, I think, even though there you might think, okay, how do we fix this? But short-term opportunities I see, but long-term challenge, I think, how are we going to accommodate issues that have to do with trust and really knowing each other? I don't know. I don't know if you have an answer to that, sort of we can sort of do that now. Otherwise, I will leave you with that. Another challenge, so go ahead, Charlie.
Oscar, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's something that we on our individual campuses are probably grappling with right now as we think about totally online orientations for new students.
Yeah.
Because it's normally that face-to-face orientation that really connects the students to the university or the college and to the advisor. All of that presently is going to be virtually. And so how do you build that?
Yeah.
And I think that's something important that we are going to have to grapple with. I think one of the positives I see is what our three associations are doing this week with partnering on the Academic Advising Global Week Appreciation, because it would have been very easy for NACADA to do this by themselves, or for NACADA to do a week and UCAT to do a week and LVSA to do a week. And instead we said, let's partner and do this as a group, because we're all going to, whether we realize it or not today, there are going to be people who do not know us at all who will watch this panel discussion. So they automatically are going to build some type of preconception about who we are and who our associations are. So how do we enable that to be what we believe it is? And I think we three believe clearly that, we say hashtag NACADA family, but I really think it's hashtag advising globally family. Mm-hmm. And we three believe in that. And yep. I think that part of what we want to do through this week, and that what we're each trying to do in our own respective countries and associations, is how do we utilize technology virtually to not just do content, to not just engage people, but to really build these strong connections. And I think both of you have really hit that. That's a challenge, but an opportunity as we move forward, as we go into this.
Yeah.
So I want to thank y'all for being here today. For those of you who don't have any concept of what we're doing, it's 8:47 Sunday a.m., May 3rd. David, what time is it there?
It's nearly 2 p.m., Charlie.
Okay. Oscar?
Yeah, nearly 3 p.m. here.
So we've got me, who's still waiting for breakfast, David, who's just finished lunch, and Oscar, who's ready for dinner and the 5 o'clock social hour. So we're all here together. And we just want to thank all of you for being with us today. Thank you for joining us. Oscar, any final comments?
No, not really. I think indeed sort of we need to continue doing these things, sort of knowing that indeed, as you said earlier, just real quick, this is not about spreading one particular idea about how advising should be conducted, but sort of this, it's a community of practice and thinking about what do we need, what do our students need here, and what can we learn from each other to make that a reality and to develop ourselves professionally. So that's a very precious and valuable thing that I'm personally, to be honest, if I may say so, I'm very happy that I sort of was able to be and continue to be a part of that. And then I wish many more will after us and with us.
David?
I think I'd just take us back to the NACADA core competencies, Charlie, which have a relational component, and effective advising, effective personal tutoring is all about building those relationships. And I think that's what we really need to strive to do going forward in the situations we're in now. It's about building those relationships and connecting to each other so we can all support each other to be, as we said at the start, stronger together.
Well, thank you both. All of you who are listening, we really appreciate you being with us today. We appreciate your patience because it's very important to understand that David and Oscar and I are doing this without any assistance from Gary Cunningham or Lee Cunningham, who normally make these things look perfect and wonderful. So please be very caring if you see any issues that don't look the perfection of Gary and Lee. So thank you all, and thank you for being here. Oscar and David, thank you so much.